Hey, welcome back to the channel. I'm Cesar Torres. I'm the founder and designer of LED Queens, and I have a mega special guest today. You're not going to believe this. I have my brother Crispin here in the virtual studio. Hi.
Hey everybody.
This is
Hello.
going to, I guess we're celebrating Pride in a mega way because I've never had you on the channel. This is new. But it's Pride, and the reason I have you here and I'm introducing you to the LED Queens audience is because there's so much going on in your space. You're a leader here in Chicago, an activist. You've worked for amazing places, promoting social justice. You're also a fitness nerd, just like I am. So we're going to get into that. But I'm glad you're here. Welcome and happy Pride, Crispin. And why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Thank you. Happy Pride. Um, yeah, so a little bit about me. Well, I'm your brother, the
Yes.
the youngest brother of three. And basically, I'm an LGBTQ activist. At heart, I've been doing activist work since like the age of 15, all focused around anti-war work, women's rights, LGBTQ justice, racial justice. And I'm also a musician, so I've been playing music and punk bands and rock bands for just about as long as I was introduced to activism and political work. So yeah, I do that in a number of different groups. I've helped organizations that are LGBTQ focused. I've helped organizations that are focused around getting young women and trans people access to punk music and to electronica music and just access to like the arts through justice and justice through the arts. So that's kind of my big intersection there. And then I'm a fitness dork too. So I've played sports all my life. I've kind of ranged the spectrum of LGBTQ identity. I like to joke. So I've been an out gay athlete. I've been an out queer athlete. I'm now a trans athlete and sort of junkie around weightlifting and fitness and health.
And running.
So and running,
That's
unfortunately
new. Yeah.
now. So yeah, so that's just kind of me in a nutshell. I'm a bleeding heart activist and a punk.
Well, you're in the right place because this is the main driver of everything in LED Queens is the queer punks ethos, and so it's really you're you're with your people.
Yeah.
This is going to be the hard part about doing a stream like this. I've known you all my life, but we're trying to unpack this all for everybody. And the one thing I will tell everybody is it's really true. Crispin was like this. He was wired this way since he was a little boy. Like he just was driven towards social justice and basically helping out with equality and getting voices heard and validated. So we're going to get into the fitness aspect, but this stream is different than the ones we've done before. The ones we've done before are QAF heroes, and those come from our community of LED Queens customers, LED fans. With Crispin, we have this relationship where he is aware of what I do, I'm aware of what he does, and we sometimes, sort of intersect there or overlap. I definitely think it's worth digging right into two of the most topical things that are on our minds this month: Black Lives Matter and Pride. And I think that I'd like to clear this up for everybody just to give context. We've done this a lot in newsletters through LED Queens. People don't know that if you're a customer, we email you at least twice a week. And we don't just send you products and pretty tights. We actually talk about pride and activism. And one thing that we actually had to do, and it was my choice, was to go dark on social media for at least a week as the movement reached this crescendo with the protests, which are really important. I fully support because I didn't want to make a misstep and start robbing the attention from voices that need to be heard. But that week is over. And now, very slowly, to the best of my ability, I'm trying to just bring in the conversations into this. So, from my point of view, we're under a cultural revolution. I'm glad that it's actually here. It's painful, it's violent. Some of it feels very unpleasant to all parties involved, but it's discussions that have been overdue for centuries. centuries. So that's just, I just want to explain this for people because I'm a brand of fitness apparel, and somebody will say, well, who are you to talk about this? And I'll say, I'm a queer person of color who makes this brand. So we're going to do this. And that this is the space we're carving out, and it's different than what other brands do. So with that being said, Crispin, what's on the ground things like for you, and how are you thinking about the movement right now and just how much activity there is and frustration and the emotions around it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, part of what you said really sticks with me, like people asking you why are you taking a position, why you're speaking up. And to me, whether you're a fitness apparel brand, you're a distributor of ballpoint pens, anyone out there doing, you don't have to be selling a product, but anybody with a platform of some kind, I think has a social responsibility right now to make a statement, to make a comment, to speak up, to use whatever resources you have available to say something. So for me on the ground, that's part of that work. So for me, some of my platform and resources are things like this, where I can come up and, talk about breaking down racism within my own community, the Latinx community, the Mexican community, and working together with other folks in our community to kind of educate each other on these issues. So we're doing a lot of my partner and I, and then our community locally here in Logan Square in Chicago, and other communities all over Chicago and all over the country are doing these amazing mutual aid efforts. So these are efforts that are designed to have the community help the community. Some of that initially was happening before the Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd protests started beginning. So that was in response to COVID. And those groups were kind of organizing to give more resources to the community. So if a person lost their job, they could post on, literally post on a sheet of paper in the community on a board in a community center. And now it's evolved into digital spaces. So Slack or a Facebook group that might be anonymous or private. People say, I lost my job. I just need $50 for groceries, or I need some prescriptions. Does anyone know of somebody that can help me get there or physically get to a doctor? And so those mutual aid efforts were in response to the lack of governmental support in light of COVID. But now we're seeing that there's these mutual aids extending to support families who were denied the lunches from the CPS funding. And so there's literally people bringing groceries every day to just make sandwiches and food and prepare them, and then have folks pick them up and drive them out to families. And then that food is also going to jail support. So people that have been locked up for peacefully protesting, trying to get them out, donating money, donating supplies and water. So things like that. I mean, even from the basic, if anybody out there has been to any of these protests and you see people out there on those corner streets handing out bottles of water, hand sanitizer, masks, snacks, that's coming from the mutual aids. So if you see the word mutual aid, a lot of folks are getting confused about what that means or who's doing that. And it really just means community effort for the community. It is not the government. It is not anyone helping us. And so it's actually a really radical kind of function that has been happening for a long time in movement work. And it's something that I'm seeing happening in the mainstream now. Like it's happening all over Minneapolis, LA, Chicago. And so on the ground, I would say that's probably the most incredible thing that I've seen. It's really empowering. And from the queer perspective too, we do this in the community all the time, right? You do it with your fitness apparel, right? Your fitness community where there's no resources for you, so you have to make them yourself.
You make them, yeah.
Yeah. So that, to me, I think that's just from the ground level. It's been really amazing to see kind of people realize what that is, and as queers, we know that's how we do it. That's how we get it done. As people of color, we know that's how we get it done. And to see other, like, really, just to be honest, like white folks with a lot of privilege, like see the power of that, the beauty of that, and that it's not a scary thing to like open your door to your neighbor and literally like open your pantry and drive it down the street somewhere. That's been, I think, one of the best amazing advancements we've seen in this movement so far.
Yeah, it's really happening. You know this this place where I live very well because we're family,
Yeah.
and you know it very well. there's a neighbor. You used to know all the neighbors here, but there's a neighbor who's really lovely, and she has children, etc. I don't even know how she identifies, but just recently there were all these cars parked in the parking lot behind, and it's a private spot. But this is the power of community building and how you speak to people. She told me, I said, hey, what's going on? And she said, oh, well, we're actually doing all these drives to take, I believe it was diapers and food to the South Side during the outcome of the George Floyd protests and COVID. And and she said, we're just here for 5 minutes loading the car, etc. And I said, yeah, of course you can do that. I trust you. And then also, what else can I do? Because those products, those supplies need to go to those people. So it's something that, even if it's micro, I think people forget that the American culture is centered so much around individualism. People forget that you don't have to be like that. There actually are other narratives you can follow where you can be altruistic. So that's really cool that you're kind of uncovering that. The role that you've been in, which is leading communities this way and engaging not just with queer people, but like you said, people of color, and also dialoguing with people who maybe have more privilege or who definitely do, like white people. How do you feel that the conversation has maybe improved, even though we've seen so much crisis around COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement? Do you see any bright spots in how this is creating conversations? I think that's already one. It's the behaviors, we're seeing them. But what about other stuff? I mean, I would love to hear your opinion on this because it affects politics, brands, commercial life,
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say that it's improved. I think that I would say it's evolved, right? Like, I think from the activist kind of movement perspective, we often, from the outside, people see things as, here's the objective and it's going from bad to good, right? But we know that that's not how people work, right? Like law and policy is kind of like that a lot of times, government, legislation, but people aren't like that. It takes a long time to shift kind of perspective. So I think we're seeing evolution is what we're seeing. Yeah. And I think one of the things that has been really amazing that I've kind of witnessed is really just the amount of connection that people are making. Again, like the mutual aids are a good example, but just even the willingness to have conversations with people. And I think it's kind of this I've been talking a lot with other activists about this too, and it's this sort of perfect mixture cocktail, Molotov cocktail, if you will, of things happening, right? It's COVID is happening, and we're in the middle of a pandemic where you can't physically be connecting with folks, and we're not in our normal workspaces. A lot of us are itching to get out. So we're seeing so many more people protesting, so many people willing to just get on their phone or their Zoom call with their family and say, hey, what's the deal? Why haven't I seen you say this? Or are you confused about this? Can we have a conversation? I mean, like I said, I've been doing this work for so long, and it feels like and it's a blink of an eye to many of my elders, but to me it feels like a couple decades of work. It feels like I've seen a lot of things evolve and change, but I've never seen the willingness to connect and have difficult conversations with different generations, and really just kind of the openness to being wrong about things, to changing an opinion, especially when we start talking about defunding the police or abolishing the police. People get very uncomfortable, right? You talk about mutual aid and you say, yeah, give me some pantry supplies to take to the neighbor. And a lot of people, I think most people want to help. But when you start talking about that's actually connected to the movement that we want to see changing the way that we interact as a community, and a lot of that has to do with the racist history of the police. So that I think that evolution's happening. I think some people are having that conversation with their loved ones, and some people aren't ready for that yet. But I think that's it's just been amazing to see kind of the dots connecting.
Well, I would say I agree with you. I think at the collective, and first of all, in my question, I didn't mean anybody to think that I think things are improving in the conversation. In fact, I think it's just the conversation is
Oh
actually
yeah.
finally happening. But as a collective, and I not just the United States, but worldwide, suddenly you do see it's the elephant in the room is now actually there, and it hits all the corners of the globe, every country, and it's really brought everybody out. And it's not just about intersectionality. Even climate catastrophe, climate change, is part of that conversation because all these things lead to all of that. It's the way that our reality is built, which unfortunately has oppressed a lot of people, and in particular, people of color, in particular, Black people. So I'm glad to see it. And I think it's literally had to change everybody.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been doing these streams this way last year because I always felt like I had to be kind of in that mindset that brands and publishers had to be in for centuries, which was there's a distance that you keep from some of these things because you're trying to be objective or a brand. And at this point, this is how I feel about it. There's nothing left to lose. Like LED Queens is really small, y'all. Like I may have a really beautiful logo and you look at my stuff and you go, oh my God, but it's really tiny. And I thought, if this somehow would backfire, that I would open my mouth to say, we do have to talk about what we stand for, the values of this company, then so be it. And it already has, had an impact, but that's only micro, and it doesn't even really connect to these bigger issues of education, the police, et cetera. It really is that time because it's reverberating. I would like to hear from you. I'm glad you explained it that way. I would like to hear from you how you define police defunding. I think there's so much confusion about what it means. This is a great time and space to let this go out through the internet and hear it from you because I understand it, I would say, to a good extent, but there's still questions I have. So maybe you can educate me today on some questions that I have about how it actually gets put into practical action and steps. So tell me how you're driving it and how you define it.
Yeah, I mean, I think lots of organizations define their abolition and let's say their abolition work differently. Defunding just like literally means, right, you taking the resources that are allocated for one thing and removing it, right? So
Yeah.
just taking away the funds. So in the context of police abolition, right, we're talking about taking the funds away from the police and putting them towards things that the police are thought to do, but maybe aren't as effective at. So we're looking at things like, conflict resolution, de-escalation, scenarios where a police officer is sent to a home where somebody might be attempting suicide, right? Is a police officer the best person for that kind of scenario, or is perhaps a social worker or another crisis intervention specialist? So when we say defunding the police, we literally mean taking the resources, and in Chicago, we're talking about $1.7 billion of resources,
it's huge.
right? Taking part of that or all of that and putting it towards those resources that would better serve the community. And people are getting confused about that. When people say defund, I think folks tend to think that means getting rid of the police. If you're talking about getting rid of the police, that's police abolition, right? And defunding is a tool. It's maybe a step in the process that abolitionists would consider, right? That this is a positive step towards the abolition of police. But by and large, when you hear kind of governmental officials talking about defunding anything, defunding schools, defunding police, they're talking about just minimizing those funds. So I don't know if that clears up some of your questions.
It does. And I do have a few because they're just ways that I understand it, or I guess also part of like my values that I would like to see happen in that in whatever way I can contribute. We're on the same page about defunding. That's exactly how I understand it. I think part of that movement at least in my wishes, I'm not describing what it is. It's my wish is also to completely overhaul the culture of what is basically military slash police. Because unfortunately, in this country, they go together now because it is militarized police. But it's also, even if it's like defunded, changing the way in which leadership is implemented, the way in which people are trained. One of the biggest problems with the police racism and the lack of accountability is because the culture inside those organizations lets them, do it, lets them get away with all these things. So I guess my question is that part of it to also whatever's left in the funding for such a thing such as police, also changing the values and culture?
Yeah, I mean, that can be part of it for some people, and I think that's some of the confusion about the messaging around this, because folks are getting some information from Black Lives Matters, right? Defunding for them means something really different for
Worth noting.
Illinois state legislature, right?
Yeah.
Those two things they're two different. They're talking about the same tool, the same action, right? But they're or strategy, but they're talking about it from a different lens. So I think the kind of the more mainstream digestible version of that is kind of allocating funds to change some of those dynamics. And some people have a harder time kind of like unpacking the history behind the police, right? We're not necessarily just talking about defunding as a tool to respond to what some people think are like these isolated violent attacks against specific people, right? People doing the work out there are talking about addressing a systemic issue of targeted violence that's actually rooted in white supremacist policing, right? The history of the police force literally comes out of white supremacist groups such as the KKK organizing, sanctioned organizing to police Black people, right? And then, of course, over time that extended to other immigrant groups like, Mexican folks, other Latinx people, Asian folks, but, and the list goes on. But that history has been erased over time, right? Yeah, Muslims, of course. And the history has just been largely erased over time. And so I think when you start talking to activists, you start kind of learning about just the long history that our country has with slavery, and learning how to kind of infiltrate these systems in a way that serves a particular set of people that doesn't necessarily have the best interests in mind. So yeah, it depends on who you're talking to. And so I just kind of leave an asterisk for folks out there like wondering like, defund or abolish and who believes this and that. It's important to if you're out there in the community, you're at a mutual aid and you're working with an organization, or if you're just out at a protest, you can totally go up to the organizers and just ask them what does this mean? And, or just check their Instagrams, right? If you're not at the protests, Instagrams, Facebook, socials, just check it out and see it's really interesting to see the different lenses being put on these different things. And I think anyone who's like protesting and doing organizing out there kind of has a shared value that a shared understanding that there's a historical legacy of racism that needs to be stopped. And the demands and the strategies are all different. But I would say that, there's no one right black and white answer for kind of this terminology.
Well, I'm really glad you could unpack it that way. That's the reason I ask these questions. So, I mean, we're family, so we have a lot more experience, handling topics to the best of our ability. But what I see out there, especially on social media and actually in the streets now, is there's a lot of misunderstanding. People look at a slogan, or they look at Black Lives Matter, or they hear defunding, and we're not one of those people. But other people, it's like an emotion gets set off, and then they're no longer listening. That's what happens. Yeah. The curtain comes down and they're not listening to the subjectivity of some of these interpretations of it. And so just like talking about people's sexuality or their background, whatever, getting into a conversation, what you just said, you actually answered the question I was going to ask, which is how can people reach out to organizations and say, how do you interpret defunding or whatever? You just basically answered that. Because I have a lot of questions, and basically these are starting to align with how I see it, because it will be subjective. Any discussion with humans, some things will become subjective. But to me, some of the biggest issues, well, the biggest issues in all this go so deep that they go back centuries in time. And they also speak to, and we're not going to cover this in this topic because that's a different stream, but the fundamental nature of how our society is constructed. So that would be capitalism, Western values, Christianity as a Western value. Like some of those, they're so deeply rooted, and a lot of people don't want to talk about them. At least one layer up, which is the military complex, police, the history of the racist oppression through the police. Those we can speak to because people can actually connect the dots a lot more, I think.
Right. And I think too, like, just for folks trying to kind of wrap their minds around, like, we get the question a lot, right? As people that believe strongly in this and are doing the work, that what, like, that's such a radical notion. What would we do without the police, right?
Right.
And if you kind of stop and think about it, right, there's so many, there's a bunch of great examples that I shared on my Instagram. So if you follow me on that, I have a ton of resources on there for this topic. So you can reference that. But one of the examples that I shared that I got a lot of good feedback on was, this great stream that one of these fantastic organizers out of Minneapolis shared. And one of the examples was, imagine that you're out at a bar with a friend, and your friend and their roommate get into an argument, and one of them's drunk, and they are kind of escalating, and you're trying to get them to leave the bar, and you're worried the bartender's gonna, get into the situation, and people are getting uncomfortable. Normally, right, in a situation like that, what happens? The bartender calls the police. Or somebody else calls the police, right? If they start seeing people getting pushed, somebody's drunk, and then what happens? The police come, and inevitably somebody might get arrested, or the police might, give the bartender a ticket, or somebody will get hurt, right? What police abolitionists are and defunding the police are suggesting as an alternative to that is that we give resources to creating systems where you can actually call a crisis intervention specialist who's trained, certified, and you're able to call a number just like 311, just like 911, and they will call, and you can just describe the situation. They come, they're emergency response specialists, and they arrive at the scene, and they talk through the situation with your friends. They're trained how to de-escalate. They get everyone home safely with resources that are, again, reallocated from the police funding into getting that person into an Uber or driving that person home, and then offering resources as a follow-up to that, right? So either mental health, substance abuse, conflict resolution. So really, like, kind of rethinking the way that we think about conflict and interpersonal violence in our communities, because we're not just talking about solving murders, right? We're not talking about, addressing like kind of these other areas of crime, right? A lot of the times police are brought into our situations that end up funneling people into the criminal justice system. Are brief interactions, right, around housing, around driving your car, right? Like simple things.
And they're not trained on bias.
Exactly.
So,
right?
Domestic abuse, for example, it's right related to this. If a person hasn't been trained on how to manage their own bias, right. If they come in and they don't understand the context of the situation, if they're in the old system, they have a weapon. They know they're going to make decisions based on that bias. But is that the best way to do it? I don't think so. Right. Now, the other way, it requires so much more imagination and new resources. The resources is that funding. There's plenty of people who want to get involved. But again, these groups have never really been brought together. Yeah, they've always operated in separate circles.
Yeah. I think what people don't realize too is like all those resources in terms of people do exist, right? Like social workers, conflict resolution folks, like those people are there. And if we could just funnel them into kind of creating a system where we allow people to really get to the root of these causes of violence, right? We might keep people out of the criminal justice system instead of like funneling them straight to it and creating more problems into a cycle of violence. And if you visit kind of that stream of examples that I had from this activist, it just things that you can kind of wrap your mind around, like in terms of when you do interact with the police, like things from like a parking ticket to getting into like seeing somebody get into a bar fight or reporting somebody who you think is breaking into a home, like different strategies that we can actually do, and we don't need the police for, right? We don't need to spend that $1.7 billion for.
Or guns.
Right.
Or guns,
yeah.
which is, we don't have enough time today to talk about the topic
Yeah.
of guns in this country, but, again, it's so many layers of conversation, and I'm so glad you're doing it. We are going to also talk about the rest of your life, which includes all these other areas. We're going to definitely hit them. I want to basically cinch this conversation so we can transition to the next part. And I want to mention one thing here for everybody who has made it into the stream. Crispin reached out to me very recently as the George Floyd protest broke out. And he said, could you design a t-shirt for me? Because I design a lot of t-shirts that would say Brown Squad for Black Lives, as a way to say, as brown people, we are there to support the cause. And specifically in Chicago, there's been an outbreak of violence from Latino, Latinx people towards Black citizens here in the city. And it was a reaction to say, no, we don't stand for that. We actually support the movement fully. When he said that to me, I said, yeah, of course I'll make it. But then I think that's the shift in whatever LED Queens is. Right now it's a fitness apparel brand, but maybe it's a community-based fitness apparel brand. I said, this would be the first time I want to give the proceeds of something like that. Could I sell it and send proceeds to an organization that's helping that cause? So Crispin said, well, okay, the Chicago Community Bond Fund, if you could do that. And so we have that shirt up already in the store. It takes a long ass time to ship. I'm very sorry because with COVID-19 with my company, you don't receive it for like 3 weeks, or maybe sometimes even a little longer. But people have been buying this shirt. It's only $15. And for each shirt, $5 go to the Chicago Community Bond Fund. And to be accountable, every month, every person who bought it, they get an email from me saying, here's the total amount that we sent this month. So it will be incremental for the life of that t-shirt in the store. We will continue to send that money, and there is the accountability. This is totally new and different for LED Queens. And so I'm glad to mention it. We're not even linking to it. You can just find it in the store. But I also want to put out a call on this stream. LED Queens is doing all this streaming. We're doing podcasting. And yes, we talk about QAF heroes, which are fitness-minded LED fans. But as a way to talk about what Crispin's talking about here, like a way to think of new ways to build community and provide resources, if this stream is a platform that would be useful to you as a community leader, organizer, or even just somebody in the fitness space that needs to be heard because you've been suppressed, with your voice has been suppressed, reach out to me. You've got my info right here. And you also can reach Crispin. His Twitter and his Instagram are there. But send us a message and say, have you thought of doing it this way? Or could I be a guest on your stream? Because I am remiss. Like the first few streams we've done, they've been with our customers. We've had trans folks. We've had queer folks. We've had people of color. I haven't had any African-American queer as fuck heroes yet. So I am also just doing this as best as I can and slowly, and I'm not perfect. So if you are one of those voices, please reach out to us because this is an open space. We do this at least once a week, and I can have anybody Skype in, just like Crispin is doing here. So that's part of what I wanted to mention is the t-shirt and then this open call. We have room for you, and whatever resource we can provide here, that would be cool. And we also make t-shirts. So if there's another slogan you'd like in a t-shirt, we can try that as well. And we actually have two. One is Brown Squad for Black Lives, and the other one's Queer Punks for Black Lives. So if you're not a brown person, but you still want to support it, Queer Punks is there. So, Crispin, is there anything else you want to add before we transition into the Sporty Spice hour of this portion of this hour?
Just to, follow community, Chicago Community Bond Fund, follow Asada's Daughters, Black Lives Matter Shy, BYP 100. Those are all the groups that are doing the front line work, organizing those protests, connecting with mutual aids, getting folks out of jail who have been peacefully protesting, and they have an incredible amount of resources on all of their social media, and these are all young people. I think one thing that I didn't say is that the youth are the biggest part of this movement. I know I look young, but but I
You do, you do.
but I'm
Good skin.
35. I'm not shy to say that. And the there are a whole slew of amazing queer people who are young, black and brown and POC folks who are women who are just leading the way. They are just taking it. And I've been stunned by that. I mean, I'm so moved to see so many young folks just literally just like killing it out there. So please follow those groups. They're all led by young people in the fight, and at Brave Space Alliance as well, who is the LGBT, the only Black and Brown trans-led youth organization on the front lines with Black Lives Matter and Asada's Daughters. So please support them and buy the shirt and wear it proudly if you're a brown person, and if you're a queer punk, do that too, and you'll be supporting a really good cause at the same time.
Terrific. Thank you. And again, we're not even linking to it. I'm trying to like just manage the amount of like consumerism. I mean,
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
hard for me,
Yeah,
but you
and if
can
you
find
don't
it
want
at
to,
ledqueens.com, or you can
yeah,
directly donate, which is in our page. When you go to the page for the shirt, we actually tell you in a single paragraph the most powerful way is to just send your money directly, so you don't have to actually buy the shirt.
yeah. So thanks for supporting for those folks out there that have so it's done donated directly and purchased the shirt and wore it because it's I think it is helping create some visibility.
Yes, and the we don't see it visible yet out in the streets and in Instagram because people started ordering last week, which means they
Yeah.
still have about another 2 weeks before it arrives in their doorstep. But they're
Uh,
coming, they're coming. So,
I'm ready.
yeah, yeah. Let's move into the second half of this, which is basically to share your intersection of like your queerness with your fitness. Because there's a lot of folks, especially sometimes younger people, but that's not even the factor anymore. Sometimes there's people who haven't made it as far as we have, or maybe don't have the privileges we've had in life, and they go, "I wish I could be out at my gym. I wish I could join a team with trans folks and queer folks. I wish I could transform my body for better health." And you've made tons of accomplishments. You've had, your ups and downs, just like any human being too, just like me. So could you talk a little bit about the role or the space that fitness plays in your life, and what has been challenging and what has worked for you?
So for me, I've always been like inclined towards sports. So I played, I played soccer
Soccer.
from a very young age,
Yep.
from the age of about 6 or 7 until through high school. And then after high school, I kind of played a little bit of basketball, women's football, and things like that. So I've always been really inclined towards sports. I always say that I'm a closet sports fan because I'm closet sporty spice actually is what
There you go.
one of my
Yeah.
friends calls me. But yeah, I'm kind of like I'm an arts person, but sports is something that I think are really important, and athletics are really important, and they can be really healing. So for me in my life, I think it helps me keep connected to my body as a trans person. It helps me stay aware and kind of thoughtful around the environment, like what I'm eating, where it's coming from, who it's impacting, and kind of like decolonizing fitness. I think like this is something that a lot of amazing like queer activists I know talk about. Follow that hashtag. It'll blow your mind later if you haven't heard of that before. But it's just some amazing conversations about like, getting away from fat phobia and the whiteness of fitness and like the body kind of dysmorphia and like concepts that really keep people away from just feeling good and connected to themselves as queer people, as people of color. So for me, it is political. My fitness, it's about kind of making it what it is for myself and staying connected to like my identity. Like I have a trans body, I'll always have a trans body, and that doesn't mean that I can't like set goals for myself or feel better about like physically and mentally and spiritually how I'm doing, and that's all wrapped up into that. So for me, it's like kind of a multifaceted piece about taking care of myself.
Yeah, I mean, the way I'm hearing it, it's a huge part of your life. It really is. And
Yeah.
I could also confirm that, y'all, because we're family. So I,
Yeah.
I get the selfies when you're out there running with your mask
Yeah.
on in the street and working
Yes.
out. Uh, that's a conversation. Decolonizing fitness. It's something that I come in with a lot of privilege. I am cisgendered, and even though I've struggled with my weight throughout my life, in general, I've been able to navigate so many spaces with privilege for a lot of reasons. Some of them are inherent to who I am. Some are like the resources we got as children and great parenting and whatever. But what I've seen happen over the past 3 years, because I've been running this brand, is it's opened my eyes further to the inconsistencies and inequalities of the fitness space. So part of it is the fitness industry, which has so many problems. And then another part of it is just the culture of wellness and health particularly in this country, because we have so many issues going on. And the lack of access for people really bothers me. And then the lack of actual space. I have not been able to do this, y'all, because I don't own a gym yet. But I'm embarrassed sometimes because I cannot name great spaces in general. There are a few, but I can't name spaces where I can say, this is a place where people could come in, feel motivated, feel supported, no matter how they look or where in their journey for fitness they are. It's really difficult. The culture of wellness and physical activity isn't always awesome. And it varies by sport, for running and things like, I think running's pretty open and very inclusive. But in general, it's a struggle. And right now with COVID, it actually gave me time. Even though it was a crisis, and it still is, it gave me time to think and reflect on what's going on. And so for me, I'm doing all my workouts here at home. But even going forward, as LED Queens kind of evolves, I'm like, how are we actually not just talking and describing the problem? How are we actually going to help solve this? Because now I have customers, truly, who are like, gender nonconforming, queer, trans, and gay. And they go, I have this problem at the gym, or I don't go here because they're going to make fun of me. Or I get someone like this where they go, well, I go there and people think I'm like the funny gay guy. And I'm like, well, that's not cool. Don't be a token. Don't be a joke. And so I think the future for this is it starts looking different because truly COVID, accelerated like my thought process on it. And so I don't know what happens going forward, but again, this is an open call to people who hear this. If your gym space doesn't feel welcoming, or like look at CrossFit, if the leader of the organization is a racist, we don't have to put up with it. There's resources that we can put together, digital and physical, to move that. I do want to ask you about this because this conversation, and it is very personal. But you're such a community leader. I would love to just get your opinion. How as a trans person, how do you feel about like spaces in general? It can be team sports or gyms or whatever, but I've never actually sat down and asked you it must be really challenging. I can only imagine. So from your point of view, what has that been like navigating it through a lifetime?
I mean, I feel like maybe I'm the exception to the rule or something like that because I feel like, my personality well. I don't, can I curse on here?
Oh yeah.
I don't give a fuck. Like I'm just like, I don't. I'm like, I feel like I've always just been like, I want to, oh, girls don't play guitar. I'm like, I don't give a fuck. I'm gonna play guitar. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, they're like, oh, we've never seen like a Mexican girl play, bass. I'm like, I'm gonna play bass. Like, and same with, when I transition, where I'm like, I just don't. I've always had like an energy about kind of just making space for myself where I need, and I don't, especially with fitness and sports, I don't think I ever really craved that like deep connection. Like to me, I was just like, I just loved playing, like being on a team, and just like everything was kind of like, anyone who's played on organized team sports will tell you that like you kind of you get into a place where you're like just getting the job done, and off the field and off the court and stuff, there's all other sorts of like gendered and weird dynamics that happen,
Sure.
but like on the field you're like, I don't you're like, we're just doing this. And so I think I didn't ever like have a sports community growing up. Like I didn't really like enjoy connecting with people off the field or off the court, because I just didn't I don't know if I just didn't really feel that that was like a part of my life. It was a segment, and I didn't crave that. So in some ways I'm the exception, because a lot of people go into sports because they want that community. They want to
Right.
feel, they need the motivation, right? Like they need like a personal trainer to like meet with them and like keep them like I've just always been like, I just got to do my own thing. I'm very like independent kind of in that way. But I guess too, like it also, it kind of prepared me, I think, that mentality for being isolated in like athletics. Like I don't, I oftentimes, like even at the gym, like I'm like I'm in and out. Like
Yeah.
I don't feel nervous or worried. I think I also have a lot of like body privilege as a trans person that other folks don't. Whereas like I just, even though being assigned female at birth, I've always had like bigger shoulders, and I've had like the resources and support to have top surgery and things like that, where I don't worry about my safety as much as other people do. And I'm very, very aware and very conscious of that privilege. But it's like, for me, I think I see other trans people struggle with fitness in a way that makes me, want to be able to figure out how to support them. And usually I just send them to you, to be honest, or send them
Thank you.
to,
Thank you.
the groups and stuff like
Thank
that.
you.
Like, or the stuff that's happening like at Rockwell Barbell with their like LGBT groups. So
Right.
I tend to like have other resources for people if they're like, hey, so you got like, you got really like fit recently. Like, how do I do that? And so I think but there is a bigger dialogue and challenge for, trans folks to access those spaces. I think historically everything's just like super gendered, and it's super like gender performative, right? Like, like weightlifting can be very like gender performative, or, if you're really into like running can be seen as a very feminine kind of sport to be into. So I don't know, I feel like everything is so hyper gendered in athletics. Some people are starting to push the envelope a little bit, but I think that particular industry has such a long way to go to like including especially non-binary people and gender expansive people. It's like, I mean, trans is barely at the tip
Asexual
of the
people, all
iceberg.
of it. Yeah,
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
No, well, again, some people are just seeing us on a screen together for the first time. We are cut from the same cloth because we're living the same experience, in the sense that it wasn't until I started publishing my books, getting myself out there on social media and generating LED Queens, that I realized that I just do what I do. Like that queer punk ethos, or the punk ethos,
Hmm.
is you just get up and do it. Like you figure it
Hmm.
out, you do it. But over the past, decade almost, people come to me and they go, how do you do it? Or I wish I could have the bravery or the character to do such and such. And I used to sort of think, but I'm like, you just do it. And then that's when I realized, I'm like, well, I have privilege that some of it's self-generated. It's
Yeah,
just who I am.
right.
And it's LED Queens. It's being in gym spaces, cosplay, the weird niche that I fit in with queer cosplay in the community is still to this day, it may be small, but people go, I just want to be able to do what you do. And I go, well, you were already able to do it. So providing that support and encouragement for people is the best that I can do. even though everything I work on is very micro and like mega indie because it's like very small audiences. It's what helped me do my thing when I was a lot younger, which was music. Music inspired me, art, people modeling behavior that I thought, could work. So it's sort of like, I guess, come back around, but you just described a similar thing. And we have good parents too. It's just, we haven't held ourselves back. I've never been afraid to just move into a place and say, I'm going to carve out my little niche in there, as weird as it may be. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny too because I think like there's like I was saying I'm closet sporty spice that like it can sometimes be stigmatizing to be into health and wellness and fitness and athletics as a queer person. I in my own experience.
How so?
That just in the community that if you're and I guess this might be an experience because I'm not within like the gay cis community, right? Like I've spent a lot of like my youth and experience in lesbian, queer, and like dyke spaces, and then like trans and TGNC communities. So like in those spaces, you don't often it's often not welcomed as like a normative thing or a commonplace thing to be a super huge Bulls fan like I am, or like to get really into maybe weightlifting, maybe like heavy lifting is kind of normalized in those spaces. But like if you're like myself, like part of my reboot of fitness, I think in the last few years has been like, I live on a plant-based diet, as you know, and a lot of that has been connecting the dots of like my diet and the environment and access to food and like taking care of myself, and that also increasing my fitness and my athleticism. And so I think that's not necessarily as like a hot topic. It's not seen as something that makes you not part of the queer narrative, I guess. But to me, I'm like, what's more queer than like, taking care of yourself and doing it outside of this like heteronormative structure of like you log on to CrossFit.com and you see a bunch of white people with like ripped bodies, like, doing a bunch of crap that you probably feel like you never can do. Right. And so to me, I feel like, that's your brand. So I'm preaching to the choir here, but but from the community, from like a queer women's or trans community perspective, I think sometimes people, as a response to feeling left out of that, kind of make fun of it, maybe, or push it aside, or think that it's like connected to because it can be capitalistic, right? And connecting it to those things. And so that's been a challenge for me,
No, that's huge.
And you may need to have another guest on now to talk about that.
No, we're going to have to go deeper, and we can do a three-way Skype thing where we can have both of you on here. I want to speak to that too because this is like right in the scope of LED Queens, which is this channel. This is something I struggle with, and I haven't talked about this with LED fans very much so far, but you'd be surprised. Some people would look at what I do or how I carry myself in the world physically, and they would go, "Oh, well, he's always doing his thing, and he's never holding back." But one thing that actually gives me trepidation in the same way you're talking about, which is some things are welcome or not welcome or seen a certain way, in the world of cisgendered gay men, which is in general what I'm around. It's not the only space, but in general, my problem with how I live is actually that, and some of it's self-generated, but my problem is actually that anybody who's like more into the sports and the fitness and, the aesthetic of fitness, there's an instant sexual objectification that is self-directed, but also coming in from for people. And so what I mean to say in other words is that people think that you're a gym bunny, or people think that all you care about is how you look, because that leads to the sex that you're going to have with other gay men.
Right.
So it's a type of currency that people think you have. And it drives me nuts. In the past few years, I've been pretty sporty spice since my 20s, but in the past few years, my body physically has changed a lot because I focused more on bodybuilding. And one thing that, it's happened to me like several times. People walk up to me, acquaintances or friends, and they go, "Oh, well, you must have it made now." Because now you look this way and whatever, and like you've like reached a new echelon, and I want to just like pull my eyeballs out when I hear that, because I'm not an introvert, but I go, there's more to everybody than just how you look. Now you can be into presenting in a certain way, but that's been the very difficult. It's one of the biggest challenges of navigating a brand and driving a brand like LED Queens. Because yes, it is presentational. We actually talk about presentation all the time, but that's not the only thing. I mean, there's a full context of a human being that isn't just about whether you've got like nice pecs or a tight butt, So
Right.
it's a struggle, but I think that's what I didn't see any other, fitness or athletic brand talk about. Because all they want to show you is just how to be like a fantasy of yourself. Like,
Right.
oh, I'm gorgeous all the time. And I'm like, actually, no, we have real bodies.
Right.
They look good. And if we have good self-confidence, they look even better. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
really
and I
hard to
think
unpack that.
Yeah, I feel like that's why, the trans conversation and that piece of like how your body looks and how people perceive it. I mean, that's like in the trans experience. That's when you like through first whether or not people transition, but I'll speak to my own experience. Like when you first transition, what I would like that's all you think about. All you can think about, like 90% of your brain is thinking like, is this person seeing me this way? How do I see myself? Like, what does that person think? Are they going to misgender me? Are they going to see this about me? Are they looking at this part of my body? So it's like a lot of people experience that challenge because of the culture, the diet and like fat phobic culture that we live in. And they do think about that to a degree that's dangerous, but add that onto having a trans experience.
Exactly.
And you can get really like it can be really dangerous. And then add that to being perhaps a trans person part of the queer or gay community.
Yep.
And then you have a whole a whole stack of crap basically that you're juggling and trying to deal with. So it's like, for me, I think it's so important in these fitness spaces for trans people to feel like, the goal is to just feel your body, like literally feel your body. Because I think that that's a concept that is a lot of people might relate to, but I think that it's almost a uniquely trans experience at the end of the day, where like you can be so disconnected from your physical body, even as a coping mechanism, so that you can like to be able to find a community where you're like, yeah, I'm going to go for a run and literally like feel my lungs for the first time and whatever, if that person's gone on a run and whatever, or I'm going to go lift these weights or whatever it is, it can be such an empowering feeling to just be like, wow, even if you're not on hormones or anything like that, just to be like, this is my body. This is what I have right now, today, in this moment. And that can be a really like empowering thing for trans people and people who are gender expansive.
That's like, I want to frame that as a quote. That's really nice. I appreciate that. I like that. I want to mention something else here too, because some people are going to watch you on this stream. They're going to look at me too, and they're going to go, let me go check out those Instagrams. And as people go visit both yours, but then mine, and we just had this conversation about bodies and different kinds of bodies within queerness or anybody else, because there's even cisgendered customers. From behind the scenes, I'm going to unpack something for y'all that like some brands do sometimes, but it's worth noting in this year because now it's Pride Month and I don't want any misunderstandings. When we started out when I started the brand, there's no one else. The first year, 2 years, I did what is generally recommended for marketers, which is to work with influencers. So we did reach out to key people, and some did include, trans folks and people of color and gay people. And we would send them the product and we'd say, can you just look good in the, thing and post your selfie, etc. As I did it, I didn't have the best experiences with it precisely for the reasons that we're talking about here, which is there authenticity in what's going on out there? And, yes, it can move the needle sometimes with sales. But as of last year, and I didn't publicize this, but this is a new year because we're kind of bringing out all the elephants in the room. I stopped working with influencers as of last summer. I phased it out because of the lack of authenticity, because of the weird, like, mega capitalist culture and the system it had created, which was very superficial. And 3, because I wasn't actually starting to represent all the bodies and all the people I wanted. So if you visit the page now, most of what you're going to see lately is me, because during COVID, our sales slowed down quite a bit. You know, we're still there, we're still going. If you want to, like, you know, get some really awesome tights, we got them. But our sales slowed down. And what I've been focusing on for like the last 6 to 9 months is showing just the customers. So in general, a lot of our customers tend to be cisgendered gay men. We have plenty of trans and gender nonconforming customers. But here's the thing. I want to expand that. But I can't do it unless we are reaching those people and able to re-show them, like take their tags and put them on the page. So what you should know is we don't put influencers on there. And that's why the page looks that way. So I'm doing it to the best of my ability. All you ever have to do is tag us, and then we post everybody, basically, as long as there's a face. One thing we don't do is do faceless images, because our product does cross over also with people who have a fetish for spandex and tights and all that. And that's fine. That's part of the history of the brand. But we require a face. So that's another thing. It's to be proud of who we are. And so tag us, put us in there. But, you know, as a way to respond to what you just said, Crispin, you know, I think all brands, all publishers have to do a better job to do representation. So I don't think LED Queens has done the best job in that. We have a long way to go, but we're trying to get there.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement and the defunding the police movement, it's a conversation that's evolving, trans inclusion in athletics, I think, because, you know, it's just to get people to wrap their minds around. I think people have a primer now, right, for trans experience within the LGBT umbrella, like, largely. But I think understanding kind of the complexity and the intersections and the nuances of that identity, and really what it means to, like, really be accountable, to really show up, to take actionable steps to include people. I think that's actually, again, another, to take it back to the first topic, that's one thing that we're seeing change, right? Is people are realizing it's no longer good enough to just slap a picture of a trans person or a Black person in their brochure, right? It's really important to ask the question, well, how are we really, like, talking to these communities that we may claim to represent or claim to serve or sell products to, whatever it is, and how are we, like, involving them? How are we inviting them to be part of that change, to be part of, you know, because I think a lot of companies are right now are thinking, like, you know, well, we mean the right thing. Of course we, like, stand with, like, equality, right? And then they're like, but why do I have to, like, say something, or why do I have to take the next step? And it's like, well, because all that attitude, that's been happening for the last 20 years, right? We've been part of the brochures. We've been part of the, you know, the stickers. The
tokenism. Yep.
Right. And, you know, and I think it's just, that's one of the awesome things happening is it's happening to, you know, it's not just talking about racial justice, it's talking about trans inclusion or women or any kind of marginalized or underrepresented group. And it's just, I think that's for fitness. That's the next frontier, right? It's like, how do we include race and gender identity and disability and all these different kinds of groups that, you know, everybody needs to get their fitness on. So it's just like,
we're all human.
Everybody
we
has
all
a body.
Need it.
Yeah. Everybody literally has a body. So.
Well, and this is, I get this question a lot. You know this, but people, especially straight people, I love y'all, but you always send me this question. They go, when are you going to start making your tights for women? It's real simple. It's always the same answer. I'm not a woman, and it would be so arrogant for me to start designing for women. I would love any woman, cisgender, trans woman, whoever, to start collaborating with me to design for those bodies. I can speak fairly well for men's bodies, at least cisgendered ones. But as part of that discussion, like that's literally why I don't. I could be making a ton of money because the market for tights for women, with Lululemon, I could be doing so well, but I'm not doing it unless I have a woman in my team actually driving that conversation. It can't be me. I'm not the right person for that. So that's why it also takes a while to grow these things. Because in the general capitalist sense, if you just listen to the marketing data or the audience data, you can, of course, make any product and just go, boom, go gangbusters. But it's taken me a while because I don't want to do it that way. So,
yeah. I appreciate
it. we're getting there. We're getting there slowly but surely. And if anybody's curious, I don't have full-time employees yet. I do have a staff writer. Her name is Kelly, and she writes the most amazing blog posts and content inside our newsletter. So if you want to get it, just go to ledqueens.com, sign up for the emails. You'll see Kelly's writing week by week. But we're trying to grow a lot more, obviously. We have just the last chunk to kind of, show the world like what you're all about. And we cannot leave this conversation without talking about music. So as long as you've got time, we got about another 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You've been a musician all your life. You play multiple instruments. Your band, which I'm actually going to add to your overlay, is Deep Fake. You're on Bandcamp, right? So maybe we should link to that. What's your username on Bandcamp?
Deepfake Shy.
All one word?
Yeah, Deepfake and then CHI.
Great. So can you talk a little bit about where you're at with that, with your band, what lies ahead while I do your overlay?
Sure. So I'm a bass player and guitarist in the trio Deepfake. We are a punk and kind of like a noise rock, poppy noise rock band here in Chicago. Again, I play bass and kind of interplay with our guitar player Kate Walsh, who is awesome, and also a musician and kind of like multifaceted musician. And then our drummer, who is Karin Faisenfeld, and she's played in a bunch of different punk numbers and stuff, and she also lives here. And
she's great.
Yes, she's cool. Yeah. Their band has been around for a few years. We Karin and I were looking for another kind of project because we came from a different band called The Recruitment, which defunct in about 2015. And that was a queer punk, political, like pretty like in your face band a la kind of L7, 7-Year Bitch, and that kind of like Riot Girl vibe. And you took a few years hiatus from playing in bands to just, part of it was transitioning, and part of it was just really trying to heal from some things that happened in the industry and to me in that band at the time. So Deepfake is a new project, and we just released an EP. It's just the Deepfake mixtape. It's got 4 tracks on it. We recorded it at Electrical Audio, which is Steve Albini's studio here in Chicago, in Studio B. We worked with an amazing recording engineer, Greg Wayekte, who is French, and he's currently in Paris, unfortunately now, but he normally works out of Electrical here. And we're on pause because of COVID, but we have some content up there, and hope that you can take a peek and listen to our music.
No, you should. I actually put the overlay on, so under Crispin's name, you'll see now we've got the link to Bandcamp. So go check that out. You can go get the music. And I'd love to ask you, I've never actually asked you this, but what makes Deepfake different than anyone else out there who's making music?
Well, we are weird. I think we just have fun. I think the way that I like to approach both listening to music and being in a band is that we're all activists. In fact, our guitar player Kate is the one that's kind of connected me with a lot of the mutual aid stuff happening here. She's super active with the Chicago Community Bond Fund, which is why I'm so familiar with them. But we're all activists, and we're all queer people, and we just kind of are rooted in the sense of like connecting with people in a meaningful way is the best way to make art, like, or best way to like create anything, whether it's your podcast or whatever. And it's like, if you don't really believe in the people that you're collaborating with, you're gonna kind of do a shitty job, or
Yeah,
it's gonna
agreed.
be apparent, it's gonna be
Agreed.
real apparent. And so I think that for us, that's been different. That's what makes Deepfake different, is that we are a politically minded band, but we're not. If you listen to our music, we're not necessarily we're not like Rage Against the Machine, right? We're not exactly like throwing out protest signs and anthems. And if you listen to the Recruitment, which you can Google also, or on Bandcamp, that was a little bit more straightforward in your face. I think we just have fun, and we are all punks in our hearts, and our music kind of uses elements of punk, but we're not 100%. They like to say whether you're an egg punk or a chain punk. Have you heard that term?
Oh yeah.
So for the LED fans out there, that's a fun punk history education. But yeah,
Well,
so
actually, unpack that for them. Some LED fans don't know.
oh yeah, so we would be considered, Deepfake would be considered egg punks, perhaps, by the young folks, because and then the chain punks, right, are another category of punks. The egg punks are the punks that are like, and when the riot happens, it's a great time to bring up this topic again. The riot happens, the egg punks are throwing eggs, right? And the riot happens, and the chain punks are taking out their chains, right? So it's kind of like whatever. It's kind of a funny thing, but
I love it.
the concept being that one is more aggressive and kind of straightforward and like anti-system, and the other one is a little bit more like anti-system, but also like, here's this digestible melodic track for you. So we're kind of a mix of both, I think, which is what makes us different, right? Some people think you have to choose a lane, but I think it's kind of our queer response to these kinds of like binaries, that we're both. We have, if you listen to the EP, we have a couple tracks that are like kind of boppy and straightforward and like a little bit more indie pop leaning, and then we have a couple tracks that are like the bass is super blown out, and like if you turn up the track on your stereo system, you'll hear some very fuzzy deep deep sounds on the low end. So yeah, we're both, and I think we don't feel like we have to like pick one, and it's fine. Yeah.
You described that really. I would say you're in both. The way I see you guys, exist and activate inside the world or out in the world.
Yeah.
And I would definitely think, anybody watching this, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but between LED Queens, my novels, and then the work I do with Pablo Green, which is a whole different extension of art, which nowadays is photography and film. It's somewhere in between them, because there's times when I'm like, oh, it's a little more like egg punk. I'm just, doing like a thing, telling a story. And then there's other times when it's like, no, we're actually going to get in your face,
Right.
and really, not
Shake
let
you
shake you up. So I appreciate that. Crispin, this has been such a great hour and change. You have an open invite to come back here. And thanks to you, because we did open this door thanks to questions I was able to ask you. This is an open platform for other people who kind of, if you feel like your imagination takes you to the place where this could be a way you can reach people with voices that need to be heard. That could be in the issues of equality, queerness, LGBT rights, human rights, and fitness. We got you. So just reach out to me, reach out to Crispin, and what's next for you? I guess that's how I want to wrap up. What's next for you in terms of like, creative work, artistic work, and activist work?
Yeah, I mean, I think trying to really support for the activist work, supporting the movement from kind of this like behind the scenes piece. I think like it's important to educate other like Latinx folks, and supporting the mutual aids, and finding other ways to plug in and plug other people. I've found that doing the education work amongst white folks who have a platform and brown folks that don't quite connect the dots yet is part of my work right now. So I'm working on that. And then creatively, I think Deepfake is trying to, we're doing some songwriting as much as we can in between all this on the ground work that we're
Yeah.
doing, just as like a group, I think. But yeah, we want to record another full length. Things are eventually going to shift. But luckily, one of the things that is amazing about recording is that we can do that anywhere. Things have just changed so much technology wise in terms of music and creation that we can kind of think a little bit more creatively about how we're going to record. I mean, I was just listening to an interview with Butch Vig a couple days ago, and who's the producer and drummer of Garbage.
Garbage.
And Nirvana and a bunch of amazing artists. But he's a very accomplished recording engineer. And one of the things that he said, he was like, I don't even really believe that we need recording studios anymore. He said, if you have a computer, you can, there's so many filters and things on your software now that you really don't even need like special mics or acoustics and things like that. Now, that's for some people that's a controversial concept, but I think that we're trying to explore that, I guess, basically is what I'm saying. So we'll see. That's the next thing, and then putting out some media, because we have some things tucked away that were pre-COVID that we were excited about, maybe kind of like music video type stuff, and some other kind of exciting, like just thinking a little creatively about how we're going to engage. So we have some stuff coming down the line, so you can stay tuned.
I like that. I'm looking forward to that. Because you guys have generated, quite a bit of stuff, but I want more visuals to go with the music. So anytime you're going to release that, I'm down. I think I'm definitely much more like Butch Vig, and maybe having the bald head helps. He's bald now. He didn't used to be, but I come from, one of the reasons we're here is because I come from traditional media, even though I came into media when it was digital. So I've never worked in print. I've always worked in internet journalism. But I basically left my life as a journalist like 4 years ago in New York. I came to Chicago and I started this here. And with what I'm seeing today, with the outcome of Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, plus COVID, and some of the, if you follow the news in the past couple of days, all these motherfuckers are being dismantled, including some of the biggest names like Condé Nast. Just search for Condé Nast right now on Twitter. Mm-hmm. And they're revealing really the systemic racism that exists at the very top levels within
the cookies are crumbling.
Cookies are crumbling, and I'm glad. And I've been part of the cookie because I went to school and I was trained to go into those publishing systems. But in talking about providing this as a platform for new voices, doing this kind of thing, and for my work, which is, the creative part would be designing, taking photographs, making films. I'm still making them. And I've actually been doing it through COVID, through digital. So I actually would argue we can do all these things. They're going to look different, but with technology, we're ready to go. I don't need NBC to get on here and actually do a broadcast, which is what we're doing right now. Yeah. So we're good, y'all. We're good.
It's
just embrace
wild.
It. And
I mean, I couldn't agree more. And we're in the middle of, like, I think most bands, anyone who's a musician out there was probably grappling with the same thing, but like there's so many things happening that I wouldn't have even have entertained pre-COVID, pre all this change. Like I have friends reaching out from different cities. I have one friend actually in Minneapolis who it just has been sending me. He's been saying, send me tracks, and he's a hip hop artist. He's like an electronica, deep hip hop guy. Just send me tracks, right? Ooh. So have people like reaching out, and that the sending the stuff over the internet is kind of a it's been going on for some time kind of thing. But I think that was like all these genres staying in their lane has been just the norm, and now people are just like thirsty, right? He's like, I want to create, so send me things. And he's been extrapolating things from like little voice memos we have from like our gnarly like rehearsal studio, and just like and it's like it's fun, and I think people are able to connect. Like I wouldn't have been able to collaborate with him like that before, but just would have thought, I'm too busy or whatever. And now we're like, no, we need to do something because we want to, like, we have an energy. So I think it's just going to be, like you said, it's a new day for making resources. We don't need that middleman.
And the last piece I'll say, this is part of like the change in how we do things. What Crispin and I just mentioned here, also we're acknowledging our privilege. We do happen to be tech-minded people who embrace technology, but there are plenty of folks out there who may be, black folks, queer folks, or just anybody who just have never had the resources. And maybe it's intimidating just to even get started. You can definitely reach out, and I'll make a YouTube video if you want, and I'll show you how you can start streaming or doing filmmaking out of your house with a laptop, or point you to the right resources for that. I definitely want to say that, for some people there is an economic barrier that they think, I can't do this, but you can. And as long as you have a smartphone, most people have a smartphone, you can do almost everything we just talked about. So reach back out. It is a community resource, because you don't have to feel like you have to be a rich person to do amazing creative work. So
yeah, for sure.
We're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for being here. I hopefully will see you in person sometime soon.
Hopefully.
But it's so good to have you here. And if you, want to jump back in and do another topic that's even more focused, you're welcome. So for those of you watching, we're going to finish up. This will go out as a podcast. We're very behind on podcast publishing. So if you're a audio editor and you just need a quick gig to edit this audio into podcasts, reach out to me, because I need your help. I'll see y'all soon. And everything we just talked about is at ledqueens.com. See y'all soon. Bye.
Bye.